Hello class! Let us now discuss your Module 4, which is your culture and moral behavior. So previously, we have discussed your freedom and reason as requirements of your morality. Meanwhile, today, let us now focus on the relationship of your culture and your moral behavior in ethics. Now looking upon the concept of your culture as presented by your PowerPoint slide is the collective set of shared beliefs, values, practices, and traditions that define a particular group of society, and that it shapes how you, as an individual within that group, perceive the world and interact with each other, as well as navigating their environment. So in here class, your culture is the shared identity and social glue that holds a community or society together. It encompasses your traditions, your histories, your costumes, as well as your language, which is one of the most significant threads that shapes your culture and identity, as it allows you to communicate and express your thoughts and emotions uniquely. Moreover, class, your culture evolves over time due to interactions with other cultures, technological advancements, and changing social norms which are brought upon by your globalization. This evolution can lead to both the preservation of cherished traditions and the adoption of new ideas. Your culture also plays a crucial role in shaping your arts, your music, your literature, and even your food, providing a lens through which people, including you, express your creativity and tell your stories. Ultimately, class, your culture is a rich part of your aspect of your human society, influencing nearly every part of your lives, enriching your understanding of the diverse world we inhabit. Moving on towards the concept of your relativism, your PowerPoint slide shows that relativism is the idea that what is true or right can vary from person to person or from culture to culture, and that truth and morality are relative to individual perspectives or cultural norms. In here class, this means that relativism is the notion that a fixed truth or a single correct way of doing things applies differently to everyone or everywhere. Instead, it suggests that what is considered true or morally right can change depending on who you ask or where you look. So, class, imagine that you have a favorite flavor of ice cream like chocolate or vanilla, but your friend prefers a different flavor. Neither of you is wrong because you have different tastes in what flavor do you like. Similarly, relativism suggests that when it comes to important questions about what is true or right in life, like what's fair or what's good, there can be different answers based on individual perspectives or the culture you are part of. It's a way of recognizing that diversity exists in our beliefs and values, and what's true or right can vary from person to person and from one culture towards another. So looking at an example regarding on your concept of relativism, so in some cultures class, eating certain animals is perfectly normal and even considered a delicacy. So for instance, consuming dogs is culturally acceptable in some parts of South Korea. However, in many Western cultures, particularly in your Western countries such as the United States, dogs are primarily seen as pets and companions, and that the thought of eating them is met with shock and disapproval. So these cultural differences in the perception of which animals are suitable for consumption illustrates the idea of relativism. What is considered acceptable to eat varies based on the cultural context and individual perspectives. So in one culture, it may be customary and morally acceptable, while in another, it can be seen as a taboo or even unethical. This example demonstrates how cultural relativism highlights the diversity of beliefs and practices around the world, challenging the notion of a single universally applicable truth or moral standard. Another example that perfectly illustrates your relativism is that in Western countries like the United States and Canada, public displays of affection between couples are widely accepted and even encouraged as a way to express love and intimacy, such as your holding hands, hugging, or kissing in public is seen as a natural way and positive way for couples to connect. However, in more conservative countries such as your Middle Eastern countries, public displays of affection are often viewed quite differently. Here, it is considered inappropriate and offensive because it is seen as a breach of cultural norms and modesty. So in these societies, there is a strong emphasis on privacy and maintaining a respectful distance in public, particularly between unrelated men and women. Therefore, what is seen as a loving gesture in one cultural context is perceived as disrespectful or offensive in another. So class, this example highlights how cultural relativism recognizes that what is deemed acceptable or unacceptable can vary widely based on cultural values and social norms. It emphasizes that there isn't a single universal standard for appropriate conduct, and what's considered right or wrong can be relative towards your context in which it occurs. Now, moving on towards the concept of your cultural relativism, according to your PowerPoint slide, it is defined that cultural relativism upholds that cultures differ fundamentally from one another, and so do the moral frameworks that structure relations within different societies. So in here class, your cultural relativism is the belief that different cultures have their own distinct sets of moral values and norms. So in simpler terms, it means that what is considered right or wrong can vary from one culture to another, and that this perspective encourages us to respect and understand these cultural differences without imposing our own moral judgment on them. It's like recognizing that people in different parts of the world have their own unique traditions and costumes, and what might be perfectly acceptable in one place might be seen as strange or wrong in another. So cultural relativism class promotes tolerance and open-mindedness towards diverse cultures while challenging the idea of a single universal moral standard that applies to all humanity. However, remember class that cultural relativism also has its critics. Some argue that it can be used to justify harmful practices within certain cultures, like discrimination or oppression, by suggesting that these practices are simply part of that culture's values. So this raises important ethical questions about when and how to intervene in cultural practices that are seen morally unacceptable. So while cultural relativism encourages respect for cultural diversity, it also sparks debate about the boundaries of tolerance and the pursuit of global moral standards. So another thing that you would see here in your cultural relativism is that rightness or wrongness of an action is evaluated according to the ethical standards of the society within which the action occurs. In here class, in cultural relativism, the central idea is that the morality of an action is determined by the ethical standards of the society in which the action takes place. This means that what is considered right or wrong is not judged based on some global rules, but rather within the specific cultural context such as your communities or societies. So in simpler terms, it's like saying that the rules of a game are determined by the rules of the particular sport being played. So if a particular action is considered morally acceptable within a certain society, then according to cultural relativism, it is indeed morally acceptable within that society, even if it may seem wrong or strange to people from other cultures. So in here class, this perspective promotes cultural diversity and encourages us to respect the values and norms of different societies without imposing our own moral judgment onto them. Another thing that we must look upon is your cultural universals. So your cultural universals, according to your PowerPoint slide, refers to the aspects of human culture that are found in nearly all societies despite their cultural diversity. These universals encompass certain moral principles and values that appear to transcend cultural boundaries. So in here, class, your cultural universals are like the things that are the same in most societies all over the world, even though people might have different ways of living and different traditions. It's like how almost every society has some form of language to communicate, families to take care of each other, and music or art for expression. These things are called cultural universals because they're universal or common to humanity regardless of where people live or what culture they belong to. So in here, class, think of cultural universals as the building blocks of human culture. They are the basic things that people need and do in every society, and that they show us that even though we have lots of differences, we also share a lot in common as human beings. So whether you're in Asia, Africa, Europe, or anywhere else, you'll likely find these universal aspects of culture that connects us all. So your cultural universals and ethics are related, as cultural universals provide a framework upon which ethical beliefs and values within a society are constructed. So certain moral values and principles, such as the ideas of not causing harm or promoting cooperation and fairness, are often considered cultural universals because they are important to human social interactions and the well-being of any society. So these shared ethical foundations can be seen as a common thread that connect different cultures, transcending their unique customs and traditions. However, while cultural universals provide a universal ethical framework, they also highlight the diversity in how these ethical values are interpreted and practiced across various cultures. So this recognition of both commonality and diversity is essential in understanding how ethics are shaped by cultural contexts and help foster respect and cross-cultural understanding when considering ethical matters in a global context. As an example of your cultural universals, this includes norms against murder, theft, or rape are prevalent in various cultures around the world, which reflects shared moral principles that are practiced by all countries, all societies, and all communities all around the world. In comparing the concept of your ethical relativism and ethical universalism, these concepts are two different ways of thinking about morality. In here, class, your ethical relativism suggests that what is considered right or wrong depends on the culture you're in. It's like saying that the rules of a game change depending on where you play it. So in this view, there's no right way to behave, and different cultures can have their own moral standards. On the other hand, ethical universalism is like saying there are some rules in the game that stay the same no matter where you are. It means that there are certain moral principles that apply to everyone regardless of their culture. These principles are like the fundamental rules that you can change in a game no matter where you play it. In this perspective, there are some things that are universally right or wrong, like not harming others or telling the truth. So ethical relativism says that morality is culture dependent, while ethical universalism says that some moral principles apply across all cultures. People have debates about which approach is more accurate and useful in understanding ethics and how people should behave. Our second comparison is that ethical relativism recognizes that different cultures have their own ideas of right and wrong, respecting cultural diversity but struggling to condemn actions universally. In contrast, ethical universalism seeks to find and uphold moral principles that apply to everyone, thus transcending cultural boundaries. While relativism respects cultural differences, it may struggle when faced with actions considered wrong everywhere, while universalism provides a common ethical framework but can clash with some cultural beliefs. These two perspectives offer different ways of approaching morality in a global context, each with its own strengths and challenges. Now let us move on towards your cultural norms and values. Well, class, your cultural norms and values are like the unwritten rules and deep beliefs that guides how people in a society behave and make moral decisions. So imagine, class, that norms as the visible behaviors that everyone follows, like shaking hands when you meet someone, these are accepted practices within a culture. Now, values are the hidden beliefs that explains why people do these things. For instance, in many cultures, politeness is a norm, and it's valued because it reflects the belief in respecting others. So values are like the reasons behind the rules guiding and justifying how people act. So here's an example, class. In some cultures, punctuality is highly valued, and being on time for meetings or appointments is a norm. The underlying value here is respect for other people's time and commitments. So cultural values like respect shape the cultural norm of punctuality, influencing how people behave in that society. In contrast, in another culture, being a bit late might be more acceptable, reflecting different values about time and priorities. So norms and values together create the moral framework that guides how people act in different cultures. Now moving on towards the concepts of your ethical dilemmas in cross-cultural contexts, it states in your PowerPoint that this occurs when individuals from different cultures interact, leading to conflicts or misunderstandings due to differing cultural values, norms, and ethical principles. In here, class, your ethical dilemmas in cross-cultural contexts occurs when people from different cultures comes into contact, and that their distinct cultural values, norms, and ethical beliefs clash, causing conflicts or misunderstandings about what is right or wrong. So these situations are like puzzles where the pieces from one culture's moral framework may not fit neatly with those of another culture. So let us say, for example, what might be considered a respectful way of addressing someone in one culture could be seen as too formal or too casual in another. These dilemmas arise because people from different cultures have learned to behave and make moral judgments based on their own cultural teachings, and when these teachings collide, it can create ethical challenges and confusion in their interactions. So solving these dilemmas often requires open-mindedness, empathy, and communication to bridge the cultural gaps and find mutually acceptable solutions. Lastly and finally, let us now proceed towards the concept of your moral agent. Now, class, in your PowerPoint, a moral agent is a person who has the ability to discern right from wrong and to be held accountable for his or her actions. Moral agents have a moral responsibility not to cause unjustified harm. In here, class, a moral agent is like a person who has the ability to understand the difference between what is right and what is wrong. It is similar to being a detective who can tell when something is good or bad. What makes a moral agent important is that they can be held responsible for their actions because they know what they are doing. They have a duty or responsibility to avoid hurting others for no good reason. Kind of like how a police officer has a responsibility to protect people and not use their power wrongly. So moral agents, class, are individuals who can make choices, and they should make choices that don't cause harm to others without a good reason. Just like we expect people to follow the rules and not hurt others in our society. On towards our next slide, we look upon two more different perspectives that is provided on who are considered to be our moral agent. So according to your PowerPoint first, it states that children and adults with certain mental abilities may have little or no capacity to be moral agents. And the other thing is that adults with full mental capacity relinquish their moral agency only in extreme situations like being held hostage. So in here, class, a moral agent is like someone who can understand what is right and wrong and is responsible for their actions. But not everyone has this ability. For example, kids and some adults with certain mental disabilities may not fully understand what is right or wrong, so they cannot be held accountable or responsible for their actions like others can. Now, class, for adults who are mentally okay, they usually have the ability to make moral choices. But there are very rare and extreme situations, like when someone is in a life-threatening situation, like being held hostage, where even mentally capable adults might not be able to make the usual moral choices because they are in extreme danger. So in these cases, we might not hold them accountable for their actions because they are focused on surviving, not necessarily doing what is right or wrong. So moral agency depends on a person's ability to understand and make moral decisions, and it's not expected from those who can't do so, especially in really tough situations.